The Hardcore Challenge is possibly the most fun way to play World of Warcraft at the present moment, and having now got level 60 on one character and above level 30 on a further 3 characters, I thought it was about time that I started bringing out videos to share with you all some of my ideas on what makes for a good run in Hardcore. So I decided that I'd break these videos down into class by class basis, and today I thought we'd start with the Warrior, given that that is by far the most popular class that people participate in this challenge with. So without further ado, let's dive into it. So a lot of you, in fact the most of you, are going to be familiar with the rules of the Hardcore Challenge, but for those who aren't, I'm going to pop on some of the fundamentals onto screen here. But the real one that is the most important one that we have to sort of base everything around is the fact that if you die, you are dead. You need to delete that character and start again. And with that in mind is going to be the premise for what we build all of our information around in this video. So the first thing that you're going to do when starting out your journey is going to be making your character. And of course this video is focused on warriors, so we're not going to be looking at the class, but we will be looking at the race selection. And that is actually where things start to get interesting, because you would have thought that it's pretty conclusive what the best race is going to be for warriors. If you're over on the Alliance side, you're going to pick a human, and if you are over on the Horde side, you're going to pick an orc, right? Those weapon skills that they get racially are going to be incredibly helpful. However, there are more considerations than that we have to go into with a little bit more nuance. So, the first thing to talk about is that while these characters are going to be the definite mathematical best when you get to max level for doing the most DPS, this is a leveling challenge, and if you don't get to max level, it's kind of irrelevant how much little extra DPS you get from these racials. The vast majority of people, I believe we've established that it's less than 0.1% of people actually make it to max level, meaning that you should probably prioritise getting yourself to max level as opposed to anything when you get there. With that being said, there are a few other races that could be considered as good candidates. On the Alliance side, both the Dwarf racial for removing bleeds and the Gnome racial for removing the movement impairing effects, as well as having an increased capacity for engineering, something that we're going to talk about later in this video when we get onto professions, are going to be incredibly useful to you and definitely worth considering. I'm not saying this means that they are a better choice over humans, and the vast majority of Alliance warriors that I have made, I have gone for human, but they are definitely worth considering as options. I can't tell you just how many times I have come close to death, or even on a few occasions died due to movement impairing effects. Over on the Horde side of things is where I actually do personally take one of the alternative options to the Orc most regularly, and that is going to be in the form of the Undead. While the Orc's axe specialisation is nice, it also doesn't have a great much to go with it. Particularly, actually, I find that Blood Fury is going to get you killed more than be helpful to you, because you are going to be nerfing your self-healing as well as healing done to you, which could prove to be problematic. However, if you were willing to go with Forsaken, there is actually an awful lot of benefits, both some that are obvious and some that are not. If you do go Forsaken, you will find yourself with the ability Cannibalise. Now, because you are a warrior and you don't have to worry about mana, this essentially means that you have got one on-demand 2-minute food that you can eat whenever you are killing an appropriate mob that prevents you from having to carry as much food with you or saves you if you run out of food. This is going to prove to be incredibly helpful, not only in the fact that it's logistically convenient, but it can also be used in combat if you're able to distance yourself from mobs to give yourself a little bit more health to finish off a mob that might otherwise kill you. And beyond that, you're also going to get Will of the Forsaken. Now, this is particularly useful at low levels because you'll have Berserker Rage at a higher level if you are able to use it in a constructive manner, but this will be able to help you with both sleep and fear effects, which is going to be very, very helpful indeed. Beyond that, there is a few little logistical bonuses as well, most notably in the form that you will be able to start with sword skill, which at low levels you will find that the vast majority of low level weapons that you acquire are going to be swords for some reason, meaning that if you can save yourself that 10 silver and be able to just innately use swords, that is going to be slightly helpful as well. The last race that I want to mention here is going to be Tauren. Because of their racials to improve the amount of health that they get, they are going to be viable options as well as improving their herbalism, which is going to be really helpful if you elect to go alchemy, which is one of the 2 recommended professions that we'll be discussing slightly later on in the video. This is also, of course, going to be teamed with their patented War Stomp, which could prove to be incredibly helpful in a situation where you require that short duration stun, although not as helpful as people might think because it can be delayed in its cast when you are hit. Now, regardless of whether you elect to pick a particular race, you will all be having the same talent trees, and talent trees is where things start to get very interesting. So we're not going to be talking about the protection tree here today. While I do actually like this tree for leveling a lot more than most do, it isn't arguable that it's actually a terrible tree for leveling. It lacks pretty much all offensive output, and you will find yourself just slowly dying to even the most basic mob. However, I am of the opinion that both Fury and Arms are completely viable, and if you have a strong preference for one over the other, you absolutely should pick that. There are going to be pros and cons to each, and I would personally say that you are definitely going to have a better time playing Arms. I am a Fury enjoyer, but I definitely have found myself playing a lot more Arms during this challenge because it is objectively better. That being said, it doesn't mean that the Fury tree isn't particularly viable, as you do have a lot of very nice talents throughout here, although you are going to want to be picking your talents based on survivability as opposed to DPS output. This means that a lot of talents that may be considered to be a terrible talent in conventional leveling might actually prove to be life-saving during your adventures in Hardcore. So talents, for example, such as Piercing Howl, which a lot of people miss when they're leveling normally, are absolutely vital. If you're going into the Fury tree, this is one of the best talents that you can get. Similarly, Blood Craze, not an amazing talent, but if you are finding yourself generating an increased amount of health on your character because of the fact that you are stacking stamina, knowing you're going to be taking more hits, then that improves the health pool that you'll be able to recover with this talent, as well as hopefully you are stacking entirely your mitigation with your armor to reduce the amount of health that you're losing, meaning the regeneration that you get from this talent comparative to the damage that you're taking is considerably higher than it might be in a conventional playthrough. With all that being said about Fury, however, I do still, like I say, recommend going into Arms. You are going to find yourself a lot of talents, such as on the very opening row, that increase your survivability. So as you can see on my warrior here, I've taken 5% parry chance. I think this is absolutely amazing talent, as it provides 1 in 20 hits are not going to hit you when you are tanking melee mobs. That is incredible value, as is Tactical Mastery, of course, allowing you to stance as much as you like, while still retaining up to 25 of your rage. Now, beyond that, this is where things actually start to get a little bit iffy in regards to what I've done comparative to the general wisdom of the populace. You will notice what I haven't taken, which is down here in regards to Improved Rend, Deep Wounds, and Impale. Now, Impale and Deep Wounds are both valuable talents. Rend is completely and utterly useless, and everyone agrees on that. However, these are offensive talents, and while they are helpful and they will mean that you kill mobs quicker if you elect to take them, you are going to find yourself investing 3 points into Improved Rend, 3 points into Deep Wounds, and 2 points into Impale, so a total of 8 talent points to essentially get yourself 20% critical strike damage bonus, and a Deep Wounds effect that, if we're being really honest, isn't all that impressive. 60% of a melee weapon's average damage over 12 seconds is actually negligible, and it's only going to proc off crits, which you aren't going to get a huge amount of, meaning that that 8-point investment is really not all that impressive when you look at what you can have comparatively. So for example, you could have the full 5 points in Tactical Mastery, 1 point in Anger Management, and 2 points in Improved Overpower. And that is the same amount of talent points, and that is infinitely more helpful to you. There is an argument that can be made that you might want to take it instead of two-handed weapon specialization, but given that all damage you do is going to be with a two-handed melee weapon, I am a huge fan of this talent comparative because of its consistency. As you can see, I have 2 talent points left over here because I am awaiting a weapon upgrade and I'm not quite sure what I'm going to get, but basically you are going to want to pick whichever one of these specializations that you happen to have your weapon option to. Chances are mine's going to be an axe, and therefore I will get an axe. But unfortunately, at the minute, I'm still using a ridiculously outdated weapon, so I'm just keeping these points to invest when I get an upgrade. Once you've got yourself to the bottom of the tree, picking up Improved Hamstring along the way, because this is actually a truly tremendous talent in this particular challenge, because of its ability to immobilize the target, allowing you a getaway if you need it. You are then, of course, going to go over into Fury and pick up Cruelty and move his way down like you already would have, picking up the talents that we have previously discussed. Now, the next thing to discuss is going to be professions, and there are really only two viable profession setups. You are either going to be looking at mining and engineering, or you're going to be looking at herbalism and alchemy. Now, we'll talk about engineering first, which is because it's fairly easy to surmise what you're going to be getting from engineering. While you're doing your leveling process at least, the big things that you're going to get from your engineering are going to be bombs, which are going to improve your DPS as well as providing the opportunity to get short duration stuns, which is going to be very helpful. You are going to get your low level helmet in the form of your goggles, which is going to provide you a very nice stat boost that you otherwise wouldn't have at those very low levels. Usually people are able to attain these goggles somewhere in the sort of 10 to 15 level mark, which otherwise you wouldn't have a helmet until almost level 30, if not a little bit further on. With all of that being said, the big benefit you're going to get from engineering, in my opinion, is going to be with target dummies. Now, target dummies are essentially an item that you can drop down that will taunt all of the mobs off of you, allowing you to make a getaway. Now, this is incredibly helpful and is the reason, in my opinion, why the vast majority of people that you see competing in tournaments will have engineering as their profession of choice. And if you elect to go that route, then you will certainly get no judgment from me, as all of these items have got an awful lot of utility and are very helpful. With that being said, I am actually an enjoyer of alchemy. I think that alchemy provides an awful lot of consistent bonuses, which, as you may have realised from everything so far, is the way that I like to go. Consistency is a very nice thing to have on a warrior because of how spiky it is naturally, being getting a crit that absolutely destroys a mob or missing 3 attacks in a row. These are going to be enough RNG to contend with without having to worry about things on professions as well. So having flat stat increases, which the warrior can really make advantage of, in the form of agility potions, strength potions, health potions, armor potions, as well as the big reason that I enjoy alchemy, an unlimited supply of healing potions. Healing potions on a warrior are absolutely essential, and if you don't have alchemy, you are going to be relying on fishing mainly to get them, and that is going to prove to be somewhat tedious and frustrating. With an unlimited ability to have healing potions, as well as all of these stat increases that you can keep up basically any time that you are out killing anything, you are going to find a massive amount of value from alchemy. Now, of course, you are more than capable of taking any other profession as well, but it isn't recommended as the majority of blacksmithing recipes that you are going to be able to craft are going to be having materials that you are going to have a very hard time acquiring outside of having the mining and blacksmithing professions, because they are going to be either leathers that you're going to need or rare minerals that you're unable to get without just simply farming for them. There's a lot of things that are just going to be really quite difficult for you to get, as well as quite a lot of the weapons that have procs are also going to require flasks made from alchemy, and it basically limits you in what you're able to craft for yourself to a point where it's not as viable as the other options. Of course, things like leatherworking or tailoring out, things that you're really going to want to pick up on a warrior anyway. And enchanting, unfortunately, isn't viable because you are unable to make yourself the rods without blacksmithing to upgrade your enchanting rod to get past a certain point in the challenge, meaning that the only other professions worth talking about are secondary professions. Now, secondary professions are your fishing, your cooking, and your first aid. And on a warrior, you are absolutely going to want to do all 3 of these. Now, first aid is fairly self-explanatory. You make bandages to heal yourself up, and as a warrior, you have no other use for the cloth apart from possibly the quest turn-ins, and these are going to prove to be an absolute lifesaver. You will definitely get through all of the bandages that you craft, and if you aren't, then you aren't pushing your character sufficiently hard for its experience per hour values. With cooking, you are going to provide yourself with stat boosts, much like you are with alchemy. You're going to be able to get these very early on. You're going to get the materials just consistently by killing mobs anyway. You don't have to go out of your way to do it, as well as also providing yourself with a large amount of fish to be able to level up the profession from the fishing profession that you'll also be doing. And these stat boosts, particularly at a low level, are going to be to stamina and spirit, which are absolutely going to be amazing stats for you while leveling a warrior. I think stamina is fairly self-explanatory, and spirit is honestly my favourite stat while leveling a warrior, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little while. Lastly is going to be the fishing that we mentioned, and the fishing profession is going to be absolutely fantastic for you. It's going to provide you a large amount of items that you are otherwise unable to acquire from other professions, which you might either have a use for, depending on what you've picked up in terms of your professions, such as leather for the engineering to be able to make the goggles that you're going to want. Otherwise, it's just simply going to be items that you're going to be able to vendor for large amounts of money early on, which you are definitely going to want. Beyond that, you have the potential for getting item upgrades in locked chests, as well as getting all the fish that you require to be able to level up your cooking. It's going to prove to be a very worthwhile use of your time. Now, the final thing that I want to mention before moving into our miscellaneous section of this video that we'll be rounding out the video with is going to be macros and weak auras. Now, there aren't going to be too many in the way of essential options for weak auras for a warrior. However, macros is something that you're basically going to want for every single ability that you have. Now, this is going to come essentially with three things that you're going to want to macro into your abilities to varying degrees. Now, this is going to be stance dancing, the equipping of a two-hander and or a one-hander and shield, and start attack. Now, start attack is essentially just going to start your melee swings when you use the macro, and you're generally going to want to put this, depending on the ability, in a line above or a line below the ability that you are going to use. This is very simply just going to start your auto swing timer when you go to use an ability, and is something that you're going to want to have in order to maximize your damage output. Secondly is going to be stance dancing. So some abilities require particular stances in order to be able to use, and while you can stance dance with a particular keybind in order to swap between the stances, a lot of people prefer to just automatically do their stance swap with the ability that they wish to use, so such as, for example, going into battle stance to cast charge. This is something that's going to be very helpful to you, and it's also going to greatly reduce the amount of keybinds that you require. And lastly, you're going to be looking at the equipping and unequipping of particular weapons in order to be able to use abilities. So things like Shield Bash are going to require that you have a shield equipped, and then things like when you hit with Overpower, you're certainly going to want to make sure that you have your two-hander equipped. And these abilities can have these weapons macroed into them in order to ensure that you use the optimal setup to either enable your ability to use the ability, or either make that so that your ability hits considerably harder. Now, a lot of the macros that I use, I am going to put in the description below for you rather than going over all of them individually here. However, I will have on screen me just hovering through all of the ones that I'm using currently, and you can see how they work and then adapt them from there. Now, when it comes to weak auras, I don't really have a great many on my warrior that I really rely on. The only things that I really have are a battle shout reminder, an overpower proc usage reminder, as well as my clickable food buffs that I keep at the bottom of the screen. Now, not all of these are essential. A lot of people are able to track their battle shouts for themselves. The overpower one I do really highly recommend, and when it comes to the clickables for my food buff, a lot of people prefer to not actually have these and just go into the bag or keybind their food, and that's absolutely fine too. But these are the ones that I like to use, and I will show you them all on screen here as well, and there you will be able to make a copy of them or just simply adapt them to your particular preferences. And finally, we're through to the miscellaneous section that I'll be rounding out this video with, and contrary to what the name might suggest, this is actually going to be the most fruitful part of the video. If you only watch one part of the video, I'd probably recommend this, because this is going to be the stuff that is really going to make the difference for you in your leveling experience. And the first thing that I want to talk about is going to be the stat Spirit. Now, Spirit is so horribly misunderstood and misused, and it really makes for a considerably smoother leveling experience on a warrior. Now, how Spirit works is essentially, as a warrior, it's going to dictate your health regen when you are out of combat. And unlike other classes, the amount of health regeneration that you get from Spirit as a warrior is absolutely huge. In my leveling experience in the Barons, I got the 25 Spirit buff at about level 18 while just grinding mobs, and when I was out of combat, my health was ticking back as fast without eating as it would if I was eating without the spirit buff. I was essentially eating while running from mob to mob in terms of health regen, and that is absolutely massive. Now, there are two ways to go about spirit when it comes to a warrior. You can either stack it on your gear, which a lot of people don't recommend, as it is going to be essentially a dead start when you are in combat, and I would have to agree. And this is not an optimal way of doing it. Whereas collecting a full spirit gear set that you are able to equip while you're out of combat with a use of an add-on such as item rack to enable that health regen, while then enabling you just to switch back when you move to the next mob, is definitely going to be a viable option for you. That being said, that is going to be considerably more APM intensive, and it's also not going to be as viable if you're going from mob to mob and simply just getting 1 or 2 ticks of health regen in between the mobs. So I personally like to try and get spirit from my stats as best as I can. My scrolls and my buffs that I'm able to acquire from NPCs and things of that nature. But if a particular item drops and spirit is on it, I'm certainly not going to be unhappy about it. A lot of people see spirit on an item, consider it a waste of an item when they could have had strength or agility, and that's just not the best way of looking at it. You really do want to see that spirit as a really valuable stat to be attaining. Next up, we're going to be talking about mob level differences. Now, this is going to be something that you are really going to want to be taking a look at as a warrior. Now, there is probably no class in the game that has a better time against green level mobs than the warrior. Similarly, unfortunately, there is no class that struggles more against orange and red mobs than a warrior. Now, of course, these absolutely can be killed by a warrior, and the skilled warrior will be able to make them look rather trivial. However, for the masses, it is very much recommended by me that you do not attempt to kill any mobs that are orange or certainly not red to you. You simply just want to come back later. You are going to want to do quests that are either green or yellow at a push in order to be able to secure your safety. Of course, if you don't want to do this, by all means don't. If you want to push yourselves, go for it. But if you're attempting to get to level 60, you can grind these low level quests and these low level mobs and get yourself securely experienced up until you get your level up, and you can come back and kill that orange mob later. Now, I know a lot of people don't like to play this way, and that's absolutely fine. Like I say, if you want to push yourself, then absolutely go for it. But by doing this and killing the green mobs, you are going to be able to secure yourself an awful lot more loot because you're killing a lot more mobs to level up. And you are going to be able to get yourself a nice consistency, meaning it's actually going to probably be quicker to kill green mobs than it is yellow. By which I mean that the green mobs are going to die quicker, you are going to hit them more because you don't have hit built into your talents or anything, and at low levels you're simply not going to acquire it. You're not going to have as many misses, and the mobs will die quicker and easier. As a result, they will miss you more and they will be alive for less time to hit you, so you will lose less health, meaning that you're able to go from mob to mob and just consistently grind. You're never going to have to drink like a mana user would. You can just simply charge through these mobs and cut them down endlessly, and that is going to prove to be absolutely fantastic fun for you, I promise you that. Beyond that, you are going to struggle with mobs if you are ever under geared. The warrior is incredibly gear dependent, and if you are going to grind these mobs, not only will you find it easier and find that you die less often than you would with grinding mobs that are a higher level to you, but you're going to get that loot both in terms of what you're wanting to equip in terms of gear progression, as well as being able to vendor for extra gold, and that is why it is highly recommended to do your character justice and play to its strengths. And lastly, I want to talk about ability usage. Now, ability usage is something that I see warriors messing up with all of the time, and it's really quite frustrating. So, at low levels, before you get your Mortal Strikes or your Bloodthirsts or anything like that, your primary ability that you're going to be using on mobs is going to be Sunder Armor. Now, this is an absolutely fantastic ability, as it just reduces the mitigation of the mob against your White Swings or your Heroic Strikes. But people misuse Sunder Armor in that they often are applying it when the mob is at low health, when it has little value, because you're only going to reduce the armor of 1, maybe 2 more autos. And that's going to mean that it's a much less valuable ability to use. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to stack Sunder Armors fast early on a mob, get to 2 or 3 Sunders until the mob gets itself to maybe 50, 60, 70% health, and then you're going to want to switch over to Heroic Strike, and for the longest time that's going to be how you kill mobs. This is going to give you the maximum value on your Sunder Armors for both the amount of white swings as well as on your heroic strikes when you're killing them, and that's going to be the most efficient way to do this. Similarly, in ability usage, Charge is a fantastic ability and you are going to want to open that way, but only if it's safe to do so. You can use Throne in order to be able to get a mob to come to you if that's going to prove to be safer, and is definitely the way to go if you're unsure if mobs are linked, because if you've used Throw and 2 mobs come towards you, you've already got that distance to be able to run away. Hamstring is an absolutely fantastic ability as it not only allows you to slow mobs for an extended period of time, but it also actually does damage, which means that you are able to fish for procs on overpower or sword specialization procs or anything like that in order to be able to get additional value out of them. It does cost rage, so do bear that in mind. It is going to cost you the rage that you might otherwise use for another ability, but it is nice to know that you can get these additional benefits from Hamstring. Now, when it comes to fighting difficult mobs, you are going to have 2 major abilities that are at your disposal, and it's situational on how you're going to go about using them. So Demoralizing Shout is basically going to want to be up on any mob that is going to live long enough to get value out of doing it. Demoralizing Shout doesn't really have much of a negative effect associated to it in terms of your usage of it at a bad time. It's minimal in terms of rage usage, and the amount of additional support and defensive capabilities it's going to provide you is going to be absolutely fantastic. Thunderclap, on the other hand, is an expensive spell, and it does minimal damage and applies a debuff to mobs that is debatable as to how much use it actually is. Now, Thunderclap, if you're fighting multiple mobs and you're going to want to reduce their attack speed, sure, it's an absolutely great ability. However, if you're fighting 1 or maybe 2 mobs, it is worth debating in your head whether it's actually worth using. You are going to have to use a lot of rage in order to be able to get this ability off, and it doesn't last a particularly long time, the debuff, and it's a 10% attack speed slow. Now, this means that if you use this ability on a mob that is particularly fast hitting, so say like a cat for example, you aren't actually going to mitigate all that much in terms of the time between its swings. Say for example, the fastest attacking mob in the game, the cat in Badlands, Broken Tooth, is going to be able to hit you at a 1 second speed by default. If you add 10% onto that, it's hitting you at 1.1 seconds. It's not that big of a benefit to you. It's certainly not worth the rage cost. If you have 3 mobs hitting you that are all with 3.5 second swing timers, adding that extra 0.35 on to each of their swings is certainly worth using. So it is a judgment call and something that you're probably going to want to assess by the number of mobs hitting you as well as the swing timer that you have present for enemy mobs swinging towards you. With all that said, the final part on abilities that I want to make clear is going to be when it comes to your running away and everything's gone wrong and you're just trying to live in an absolute dire circumstance, equip a shield. The amount of mitigation that you get from equipping a shield, the amount of armor it gives is absolutely fantastic, and it will make a massive difference. Once you've decided to run, which as a warrior you should be making this call nice and early, you do not want to wait until you're very low health. Either run or fight and make your mind up very quickly. But once you've decided that you are running, you equip that shield, you put a hamstring on that mob, and you run like hell. It's as simple as that. You don't need to do anything more fancy than that. If things are going really sideways and you've got it, you can press shield wall. But beyond that, that's all you want to do. Make your mind up early, equip that shield, get a slowdown, and run. And speaking of running, that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to run off from the end of this video with this horrible segue, and hopefully I will have left you all a little bit more confident in your abilities to play Warrior in Hardcore and get to a higher level than you have previously achieved. If you've already given this a go, let me know down below what you got to, or even better still, let me know what you got to on your next attempt after watching this video. Or if there's anything that you feel that I've missed, please do let me know that down below too. I'm not perfect, and people often have differing opinions to me, and I love to hear what people have to say, because then I can adapt my thinking proportionately to what other people are thinking as well, and possibly incorporate that in a follow-up video for others to be able to be enlightened as well. But for now guys, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Laters.